How would you assess the session? What were the successes? And more important, what were the shortcomings?
Who do you want to start?
Paul.
Me?
Go right ahead.
Great. I think the greatest success was probably the most bipartisan budget that I've seen. I haven't been up there very long. This is my third vote. But if you look back historically, it was probably one of the most bipartisan passed budgets in about 25 years. So we had great consensus on the budget. I think we also were able to fund education to the tune of about $1 billion more working on the McCleary decision. So I think that would be the high point. An opportunity to vote yes on a budget, which I haven't had in the last 3 votes. Voted no other time. So. And I think in the House, there was only 11 no votes. So, very, very bipartisan budget. Yeah.
JT, anything?
Well, we all kind of get excited about the same things, and I'm a budget guy. So the process was fascinating for me. I should have also mentioned I'm floor leader for the House Republicans.
Right.
So my job is to create a debate. And, normally at the end of a session, when you're in the minority, you are, feeling ignored, sometimes a little bit bitter, and you're fighting what's happening. And what was so fascinating about this time was there were some things that we didn't like. And, I don't think anybody is perfectly happy with this budget. It has things that we absolutely don't like. But during the last week, there was a series of bills coming through that really appealed to the center. And the folks that were in the center, whether they were Republicans, and I mean a very broad center, whether they were Republicans or Democrats, were the ones that were smiling, and the folks that were out on the fringe were the ones that were not so happy. And again, it's pretty unusual for Republicans over the last few years in the House in particular to feel like they had a reason to vote yes on a number of bills, and it wasn't just the operating budget, although that was the most important thing. And because I'm also assistant ranking in appropriations, I put an awful lot of painful time into that process during the 2 special sessions. There was a nearly unanimous capital budget that came out, and that was an interesting process because the House and the Senate budgets were very different, and they were able to synthesize those two in a way that took care of a lot of concerns. And one of the things that was huge in that capital budget was state of Washington is in the middle of making the largest land transaction in the history of Washington, and it's one that really is led by Republicans. And normally, Republicans don't like taking all these lands out of production. However, this Teanaway project in eastern Washington, it preserves, it's a great environmental measure, but it also is an economic development measure as well, because it allows for a greatly expanded irrigation in the Yakima Valley. That's the number 2 agricultural county in the United States, and we get to grow that. It's also one of the most poverty-stricken parts of the state of Washington, so that's a great thing. And then at the same time, we passed what actually was a pretty huge bill, although it sounds narrow, a ORV, off-road vehicle bill, that is going to open up thousands of miles of carefully controlled roads and trails so that we can start building that industry out in the areas that still haven't caught up economically. And other states have done a great job with ORV access, and it creates a ton of commerce out in these isolated areas like the 2nd District, which includes Mount Rainier and all of those forest roads around there, that is dying right now. So you put all those things together, and again, that budget, there are great reasons to be no on that budget probably, but there were a lot more reasons than normal for Republicans to be yes. And it was really interesting out in the Senate to see what happened there. They shed 2 votes on either side, right? Two Republican senators were no, and 2 Democratic senators were no. Everybody else was a yes on this by the time it was done, and they weren't bitter about it either. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
So the biggest disappointment probably would be, since I gave you my plus,
Sure.
maybe I'll give you my minus, probably was not being able to get a transportation package out. probably the biggest disappointment.
Well, and also the fact that it took an extra 60 days to get to the place that those of us that were in the negotiation knew we were going to be. But gosh, both sides had to give stuff up, and it takes a little while to figure out how you're going to get your head and your constituents to the point where you can say, I didn't get what I wanted, and in some cases, I didn't get what I promised.
Let's talk a little bit about the CRC.
Really? I'm only kidding. Of course we're going to talk to CRC.
Of course.
Of course we.
Come on.
Come on.
Before the state senate killed the CRC, the proponents of the CRC were saying that if we didn't get it done in this session, it would be a decade before this thing would come back. So I've got two questions, and I'll start with you, Paul. Do you believe the decade number, and how quickly do you think that a proposal for a new Columbia River crossing, how quickly do you think something like that can get on board again?
I think in the chamber I said 3 to 5 years, and I think it could even be faster than that. I don't think it's going to take us a decade.
Why do you think they said a decade?
I think this is an emotional issue at times where people will say things that I think really aren't in reality, to be honest with you. I think so. We'll say a decade, maybe that'll switch some votes, or we'll make it sound, really. I just don't believe that. I believe that when U.S. Secretary LaHood came and said that this project is of national significance, okay, and that it's one of the most important projects in the United States of America, for him not to come with any transportation money, to me, is so disingenuous. So when I sat and I asked him that question, I said, so Secretary LaHood, if this project is of national significance and is an important transportation project, why is there no transportation dollars? Strictly just transit dollars. And why did you bring the head of the Department of Transit here and not the Department of Transportation? And he stumbled and stammered. And I got to be honest with you, I think one of the telling factors and where solidified those people that were against the bridge was when the guy that came to sell it didn't do a very good job at all. So that's really not answering your question, but I think that was one of the death nails, is if we need some transportation dollars in this, okay? And I think now that they will bring some transportation dollars, I really do. And I think it's not going to take a decade. It better not. I just signed on to that letter that James signed on. We need something here. I think we all know that. But I think the process is really interesting. So we spend all this time on the backflow of a project, and we look at it, but we never come to the people beforehand and ask them, what type of project do the people really want, and what will they pay for? And I think that was really what was. I think one of the really problems was when the city came out, to be honest with you, and asked for a small tax increase. Didn't pass to help fund light rail. I think that was really telling too. So I think one, we need to get the people on board early and get them on board before we do a bunch of planning. What will the people pay for? Because I think the people want something. I know I do. I drive that bridge every day. So do I want something? I really do. Was I really interested in a light rail project? To be honest with you, I was not. I'm interested in a transportation project. I really am. I think Governor Kitzhaber was interesting. He says he's willing to now maybe to address the roads corridor. If he does that, wow, I am really more interested in a transportation project. Notice I keep saying transportation and not a transit project. I'm very interested in a transportation project that will service the people of Southwest Washington that are in their cars.
How will it be different than what was originally proposed?
More input lanes into Portland. More input lanes into Portland. To me, it does no good. We have 3 input lanes into Portland now. We have actually 2. And if you're really honest, it took me about 3 months to get the crash records out of ODOT. I finally had to get, and I'm not the type of person that normally says, this is State Representative Paul Harris. I have asked you guys for 2 months for the crash records on the I-5. They finally produced them for me very sheepishly because The most wrecks aren't on the I-5 bridge, on the I-5 corridor. Most wrecks happen at the Rose Quarter, at the split from the I-5 and the 405. That is just slightly higher than the I-5 bridge, but that's the number one crashes. And I said, so why aren't we addressing the Rose Quarter? Why are we building a 5-lane bridge in each direction with 2 opposite lanes into Hayden Island, but not addressing a transportation need that we have, which is more than 3 lanes going into Portland, which are going to be backlogged as they are today. And that's the bridge of the future? I really don't think so.
Do you see any other mode of transportation being added to the bridge? If there's a new one?
You know, I don't have a problem. If you give me more input lanes into, you know, more, so I can move more goods and services into Portland, into, you know, I used to run my trucks down into the industrial part of Portland, down off of the 405, down in there, heavily area. I think to not address the transportation, really to address the transportation needs was a huge miss on this. I really do. Huge. And to me, that was the issue. To me, this bridge was always about, and you guys have heard it was about bringing light rail over, which I was, if you'd have given me some transportation needs, I probably would have been okay with it. And that's basically what I told Secretary LaHood. I said, you put in some transportation dollars, you give me some more input lanes into Oregon, into Portland, that can service trucks and people, commuters, God, I'd probably be okay.
So no, any light rail or bus rapid, or do you foresee any of that being on a new proposed bridge?
Do I so? I think so. I think eventually, absolutely. Yeah. But once again, are we going to address transportation needs or just transit needs?
I think one thing that's worth thinking about in the transportation revenue package is, you know, the other 2 major bills, the operating budget and the capital budget, those were bills that were worked throughout the session, and when they came out, they just kept incrementally moving towards the center and, you know, broadening their appeal, and, you know, eventually they passed overwhelmingly. The transportation bill from the revenue package from the House was almost the opposite. You know, first of all, no one really knew what the package was going to look like until the day before the vote. It wasn't at all like what came out of committee. And what, you know, was discussed in committee was an incremental set of increases of around 2 cents per year that, you know, the people that live in rural districts and have to commute the longest distance but don't use the mega projects have a little better chance of swallowing. And when we finally got a chance to vote on something, and the package that was presented to the Senate, it didn't get better from you know, anyone's perspective. It got worse because it put those, you know, the whole 10.5 cents in within 12 months and made it harder to swallow. And you know, I almost wonder, because I think that actually beating the first one is going to make the next version of this much more easy to negotiate, because, you know, sometimes you have to lose one before, you know, people understand that you're not going to get exactly what you want, and that's the process that we went through, especially in the operating budget. So we now know that, you know, sort of with the exception of CRC, the Seattle-centric plan doesn't have broad enough support to pass. So they can tell the people that are, you know, very rapidly transit and Seattle solutions, we couldn't get what you wanted, we tried hard, we're going to have to broaden our coalition and get something that works for a broader part of the state. And I'm very hopeful, you know, that we can get that done. And I've got a different perspective on this too, because my family business is Wilcox Farms. I used to dispatch 100 trucks a day, and a ton of them went across your bridge here, because I also had 2 or 3 dairy locations and 1 egg location south of Portland. And so we're well aware that we have 2 huge roadblocks when we do business in the Northwest. You've got to get your stuff through Seattle, you know, and for me it wasn't so much downtown Seattle. I had to get all the way through. Same thing with the river. You have to get through Portland to serve the rest of the area. And nobody on our side, I think, rejects the idea of a transportation package. It's got to be one that, you know, solves the the biggest problems is it is acceptable to a broader group of people.
And, you know, it's interesting, polling the 10.5 cents with the 3 cents discretionary left at the Department of Transportation. So you're looking at a 13.5 cent possible gas tax. I did my teletown hall. We polled about 6,000 people. It's about 75% against the tax. So I get concerned maybe we're calling just Republicans. So I asked Monica, my seatmate, I said, Monica, when you did your teletown hall, did you ask the gas tax question? She says, yeah, I did, Paul. I said, so what was your results? She said, about 70% of my people were against the gas tax. So not only was, I think once again, not only was the project, the CRC, even if you threw out all that, was there an appetite for a 10.5 with 3 cents discretionary out there tax increase on your fuel right now? I don't know that it is, that there is.
Well, let me push back a little bit on that.
So, go ahead. Don't push too hard, Luke.
Just a little bit.
All right, go ahead.
Maybe later.
All right. Okay.
How often have you asked a tax question to your constituents and they've said, hey,
Well, I
good
agree.
idea?
No, look, and very true. So it's really hard. But I got to be honest with you, gas right now, I think if you look at all the things that people, especially those that are most vulnerable, those who can least afford it, those that are, you know, it's just a hard pill to swallow right now. And I would agree with you. There's no one that's going to say, hey, I'm ready to pay more. There are a few exceptions, but, you know, but gas, and especially who it hits, it's really tough.
But what do you do with that? I mean, look, I'd probably say no too. But what do you do with that dynamic? Essentially, it's saying, look, when I go and ask the people are going to say, I'm not interested in a tax. And can this state continue to move in a legitimate, forward way without ever having to increase taxes?
Let me answer that, please, because, you know, the last general election had 2 advisory votes with, you know, what had been defined as tax increases. And I was yes on both of those. Those were, you know, in those days you had to get a supermajority. And I had people call and ask, and I explained why I was yes. One of them was the big increase in the, it was a refinery tax of some kind, I think.
Could be.
No, it was bank. It was removing the exemption on out-of-state mortgage interest from B&O. And when I explained it, because I believed in it, people understood, and, you know, I don't think that I saw repercussions from that because, you know, there were good reasons to do that. I think there's going to be 5 tax advisory votes this time, and some of those had a lot of Republican votes on them. And those were ones where we felt strongly, and when I say we, I mean that was a large, you know, bipartisan majority of Republicans and Democrats. We felt strongly that this was the right choice for the taxpayer. You know, one of them was the telecom tax, where failure to act would have created a large taxpayer liability in the future. And we were divided on that because we've got members that believe strongly that their, you know, voters told them, I don't want any taxes. But we also had members, including me, that felt okay about that one because of the exposure of the taxpayers. And it wasn't a small one either. So I don't think that we're doctrinaire. We're not going to have taxes. There's going to be a high bar if we're going to give votes on it. And we're going to be able to explain to the voters why it's not, you know, the kind of boondoggle that, you know, they believe comes out of Olympia. And I also think that having defeated what we thought was a bad gas tax revenue package gives us the chance to present to the voters improvements down the line. And we don't know if that's going to happen. You know, we need to let that negotiation take place. But they want to see us pushing back, and they deserve that. And I don't think any of us are here to impose on the voters what they clearly don't want.
Well, in that regard, for a gas tax, how much of the tax do you envision the public being able to swallow?
I don't have that number. Generally, you know, you have to have a proposal before you can really present it to your voters. And, you know, I also think that What eventually comes out will be presented to the voters for their choices as well. And the success of that, I think, depends to some extent on whether or not we have a broad part of the legislature supporting it.